The first thing is the PBD podcast. We all watched it.
Yes.
And it was interesting to say the least.
It was amazing. I think Daniel Hakikaju and also Jake did an amazing job. The opposition did a pretty terrible job, but that was expected. But it was not expected how bad they did.
Yeah, I felt... Well, as far as the opposition goes, I never heard of Jake, and I've actually seen Jake talk. Daniel Hakikaju, obviously, I've seen a lot of. But at least he came across as relatively, sensible for, where I would say Christians kind of hard to back up Christianity as a faith. But him, Richard Spencer, he tried. I feel the other guy, the Brother Rashid dude, it was just an emotional claim. Basically, he started off with, his story about how he had so much trouble in Morocco, which, by the way, there were some inconsistencies because apparently he was homeless after he converted to Christianity. And yet later on, he says, look, I didn't move to America out of a financial need. I was doing fine. Apparently, I thought he was homeless and in need. I mean, that was a little inconsistent. I'm not sure what happened there. That's one. And two, he constantly appealed to the fact that these people would kill him, which, at least in an Islamic country, they kind of readily admitted in that sense, right? Basically, if this was Islamic jurisdiction and you were, you committed what would be equivalent to like treachery, basically, you left the religion in that sense, then you would be, but this is not something that would be enforced in America.
I just don't think ex-Muslims ever come with rationality. They're always emotional. They have actually no reason. If anybody who actually studied Islam would leave Islam, it can never be rational. Going from Islam to Christianity, you're going from like monotheism that's pure to polytheism or a version of it. I don't think there's a single person out there who leaves Islam on a rational basis. They usually do it because they have some desire that they want for something. There's a desire or there's a complete lack of faith. And usually, actually, I've seen a lot of times people who convert are Shiites, right? Shias who convert out of Islam because, again, Shias who grow up without any religion. Right? You usually see them convert out of Islam. But again, it's very much a desire base or like a subservient to Western ideology. And you could see it from this guy completely.
He wasn't Shia though.
No, he was not. But he had the same problem, right? He was like subservient to the West. He was promoting secularism more than Christianity.
Exactly. I think Daniel called him out several times that you're appealing more to, liberal secular values rather than Christian values. And I think that was also one of the my problem with the podcast was, I guess, guest selection in the first place. It was advertised and the title made it seem like it was supposed to be about building bridges, but they invited Islamic influencers, and then they invited the other two were not Christian influencers, they were anti-Islam.
They were straight Islamophobes,
exactly,
man. Robert Spencer wrote the book that basically helped the U.S. feel like everybody is a terrorist.
Yeah, the guest selection did not support the purpose of the podcast, which was to build bridges. Yeah, you could have Christian influencers who would talk about Christian values, right? And then you could see a similarity with Islamic values, but these guys were just like irrationally going after Muslims and Islam in general, and had really not much to do with Christianity, like the way they were talking about it.
And I think a part of this is the way this whole idea of the podcast came about, because when you see the initial videos from Muhammad Hijab and Ali Dawa, right, where they're like, we feel like we're being ambushed. But I think the idea was initially to kind of focus on kind of these Islamophobes and Muslims can almost seem like the podcast was meant to be Muslims defending themselves against the accusations that these Islamophobes bring. I think that was the idea. So I think he already had set these two Christian Islamophones basically against, these Muslims who basically expect to defend themselves. And when Muhammad Hijab and Ali Dawa brought up like, dude, this is not, how is this fair in any sense? What, we're just gonna be on the defensive the whole time against these Islamophobes? And that's when, Eddie was brought in and they were going to do this stuff. And obviously, everything that happened, they ended up with Hakikaju and Jake. But I think that's why he chose them for a proper interfaith where we're trying to build bridges, I think, which was the stated goal of PBD. Then you can't, they were the wrong people for that discussion change. Now, if you went back to just defending Islam, sure.
Yeah, but I would agree with you that Daniel and Jake were the right people for them. For the other two, I think that's definitely, they were a better selection.
I think Daniel did a good job in the end also of trying to bring monotheism actually into the conversation, because a lot of it just ended up being like the typical tropes against Islam, child marriage or slavery or this or that, which honestly they have in their own tradition too. They just want to deny it and call it fable. But ultimately Daniel did bring back like, hey, ultimately we're monotheists and we're the purest form of monotheism. and you guys basically messed up. Your earlier scholars would still talk about monotheism, and it's only later traditions that said, oh, Jesus is God. Oh, is he man God? Is he a God man? All that stuff. And Robert Spencer is like, oh, they didn't have the authority to, decide the creed at that time. It only happened on the Council of Nicaea. So this is the dumbest argument, honestly.
Dumbest argument.
As much as we as Muslims try to go back to the earliest sources, Robert Spencer is basically arguing, too bad you guys didn't have evolution of your creedal thought.
You don't have
entirely.
a New Testament.
Yeah, you don't have a New Testament, and our later sources show that it's a Trinity. Who cares about what the earlier scholars said? This is dumb.
And even when he asked for like older church fathers, he could only bring up church fathers who came after the Council of Nicaea.
Yeah.
Also interesting about building bridges, I think it's surprising. It's always the case. I've seen Muhammad Hijab and Hamza Zortzes, right? When they came together on that one debate in South Africa, I believe, right?
Right. Yeah.
Johannesburg. It's interesting. There was always like a good cop, bad cop kind of feel, right? When they team up together. So like, Muhammad Hijab was like kind of the aggressor. And then Zortzes, for the most part, he was like the guy who's like, being more cordial, right? I think in this case, it's surprising. Hakikaju was the one who was being more cordial, while Jake was on the offensive. And I think it works beautifully because Jake had very pointed arguments directed directly at the opponents. And I think he did an amazing job. And as far as building bridges goes, the only person to build bridges out of all four of them was Hakikaju. Because at the end, he promoted the idea of we want to increase the amount of traditional Christians, not the ones like these two who were saying that, the Bible's full of fables, right? And that we should move on from the past. He wanted traditional Christianity. And it's surprising. He was supporting traditional Christianity more than even the Christians were.
Yeah. I mean, I think he was the one who's like, look, because I think PBD was really, especially towards the end, right? In the beginning, he allowed that debate to occur, basically the little back and forth and stuff. But then towards the end, he was like, hey, he asked everyone, who is their common enemy? And he started with, the Christian side of things. And in Robert Spencer for that, he did say something along the lines of, it's the liberal hegemony that Danny Hakiki brought up. He did say that. He's like, it's this, it's that. And I think he brought up basically, this is our common enemy where the church values are dying and things of that nature. And then Brother Rashid was completely, he was like, anyone who takes away my freedoms. He didn't even say like, I think if I recall correctly, he was like, anyone who takes away my freedom to do what I want is my enemy. And which was one, not the question asked, because obviously it's in the light of building bridges, and so that didn't occur. That's one thing. And then Hakiki just like, well, let me answer your real question. Then he's finally one who's like, look, we want traditional Christians, we want all that stuff, because that's where we're in common, right? This what you call the liberal hegemony, right? That's what we're fighting against, and that's where we link together, where we don't want kind of these LGBTQ values being taught to our children in our schools.
I think I like the way PBD actually set up the podcast. It was actually very good. Like he allowed them freely to discuss the faith in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Then he moved it on to the common enemy. Then he moved it on to the political, right? And I think what he did was beautiful. And I think he conducted himself extremely well. And I'm actually very, very happy to see him.
He did a very good job moderating the talk, definitely.
He let them argue as much as they will. He never interrupted, but he moved it on the correct way. In fact, I think PBD, within the conversation, he clearly was aligning with the Muslims. And many times, he like when they brought like the idea that Islam sticks to its principles, right? Its values, right? Its commandments. And Christians are moving away, and that's causing all the issues where they're accepting LGBT and all this stuff. And PBD said that, hey, this is true. And he looked at the Christians. He said, what do you have to say about, our more tolerance that we have, right? And they just stress that, hey, you know what, the past is the past. We're going to move on, and the past is fables. In fact, those verses that Jake brought up, they're like, oh yeah, they're problematic for us, and it's very difficult for us. And then he just dismissed them as fables.
Right. Some of Brother Rashid's arguments were so dumb, though. They were like, oh, we never had wars. I don't think
he had any arguments.
He had no arguments.
But he's like, as somebody who studied Islam, he's like, oh, we never had wars in early Christianity. And then Daniel's like, well, because you never had political power. And guess what's going to happen when Jesus comes back?
Vengeance.
Yeah,
Vengeance.
Yeah, it's total domination.
No, because one of the main things he brought up, and both of them brought up, is actually this is all Old Testament. Basically, Jesus came and he abolished the laws. He came to abolish the law. That's what they say. And so the Old Testament was everything that came before. When Jesus came, he abolished the law, which therefore means all the law that comes from the Old Testament is therefore unimportant now. That was his point. And then the problem is, and that's what Hakiki brought up. He brought up two things. One is you didn't have political power. And once Christians did achieve political power, look what they did during the Roman Empire, during the Crusades, right? There's many. Look, the Christians, once they achieve power, they use that to enforce, their values.
It's not just Christianity. If you look at that, what is the West fascinated with right now, right? All the atheists and all the spiritual people, they all gravitate toward Buddhism, right? They're like, oh, Buddhism is a religion of peace and mindfulness and like earthly, like spirituality. But Buddhists never had the power, right? They never had political power to oppress, or they don't have minorities living amongst them to really fight. And when they do, you could check in Myanmar and all these places, they're oppressing the minorities. They're killing the minorities. It's a genocide, right? And it's with any other faith. You give them power. And Islam is the only one, when you see that they had power, Islam was the only one that actually historically protected minorities. Judaism thrived under Islam, right?
Oh yeah, Rambam, one of their most prominent Jewish scholars, was living in Muslim lands.
Yeah.
And he knew Arabic, by the way.
So yeah.
Moses Maimonides.
No, it has Islam.
Rambam, Moses Maimonides.
Islam has on conquest and stuff, but when they had absolute power, were the minority religions thriving? Yes, they were. When you see absolute power of the liberal in France and other places, are the minorities thriving? They're not thriving.
Got bombed out of their homes.
Yeah.
Well, there's always exceptions to the rule, right? I mean, sure, in general, you could say, okay, maybe for a good chunk of Islamic history, but I mean, you always had exceptions, right? At the end of the day, humans, whether they be Muslims or Christians, or they're not angels, and you have examples in Muslim history and Christian history where atrocities are committed on all sides.
No, there's always cases, but I think Muslim history is the one where there's true religious freedom that you can find, and where the religious community thrived, right? In the U.S. right now, the Muslim community is not thriving, right? We're not thriving under our own guidance, our own laws. We are thriving. We have to choose a side. We have to choose liberalism, the left. We have to choose the right. It's very difficult to choose our own path, and at times under Islamic law, Islamic rule, the Jews or the Christians, they were allowed to practice. They allowed their own judges. They were allowed their own jurisprudence in parts of Islamic history. Show me that happened somewhere else in history where somebody was allowed their own law within the majority.
Aren't Native Americans allowed their own laws and court system in their own lands?
They are, I believe.
They are. I believe so. I think
Yeah,
they have. I don't know the extent to the exceptions they have, but they are.
They have the reservations.
Well, I wouldn't say the Muslim community in the United States specifically is not thriving. We do have a large degree of freedom that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Which is constitutionally enshrined.
Yes.
But it's different than the historical Islamic countries, at least the way they would typically. Again, it is rare to see, hey, you're a person of Jewish faith or Christian faith, you can have, at least amongst matters that don't involve others, right? If it's an internal dispute, our courts won't get involved. You can, take care of it within your own courts.
Sure, but I think a lot of our, our memories or whatever literature we have on, for example, if you listen to, Yasin Qadi, he says that all the time, right, in his historical lectures, that we have this rosy picture of the past, but the truth of the matter is, prominent scholars that we revere today, they were oppressed by the Muslim rulers of that time, right?
That's true.
Yeah, Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal, right?
Yeah,
He was the one. He was jailed.
Yeah,
he was jailed.
I agree.
Anytime you go against the status quo, you disagree with them, you disagree with their laws, and anyone who has power, more often than not, they're corrupt. Right.
Yes, the nature of politics.
It's not it's not so much a history. I think historically, I guess the Islamic powers have had their problems, right? Their atrocities, even you can say they've committed mistakes they've committed, right? Christians, obviously, right? They have the entire crusades and whatnot. Atheists, you can say someone like Hitler, potentially atheist. I guess he was baptized Christian, but really was an atheist, seems like.
But hey, man, you can't compare the crusades to what the Muslims did. They literally showered blood inside Jerusalem, the holy city of Jerusalem.
But the difference is this, and I would say,
massacred everyone.
Leave history aside for a moment. It's within the creed, and I think Daniel Hakikiju brought it up during the podcast, where within the creed of Islam, and they're like, well, what do the brother Bashir's like, what are you talking about? You can kill. And literally the best quote he could find about Muslims allowing, the killing of children or women and stuff like that in war is one where basically it cannot be intentional. It's only collateral damage in times of siege and stuff like that. So basically, if you're throwing boulders at a fortress, try your best where it doesn't hurt any women and children, anyone who's not basically a warrior or combatant. And that was the best you could find. And interesting enough, he says in the same book of hadith, I think it was Sahih Muslim, he's quoting Sahih Muslim in the chapter of jihad, it also has the same hadith where it says you cannot harm women, children, in fact, plants, animals, we can't burn and pillage.
I think
Rashid
was quoting the hadith, and he was saying that because I think Jake was bringing up the fact that, you guys have like, straight murder of infants, right? Infants. And then he brought up, oh, you guys don't? And he quoted the hadith saying that check for pubescent hairs, right? Yeah. Like, but that's still not child. That's like somebody who's basically a check for seeing that, hey, are you of age now?
Right.
The thing is, in their mind, oh, somebody who's just of age is still a baby. But how could you compare that person who's like 15, 16 years old to an infant? There's no comparison. It was just ridiculous. I think that's why the brother Rashid, I'm saying, he had absolutely nothing to offer in that conversation. And I think what was it? I think he said it best. Ali Dawa. He was like, what did Ali Dawa say?
He's in a cycle. He's like a woman.
He was a woman in a cycle,
basically. PMSing. Some hormonal imbalance, was really very emotionally charged arguments the whole time. What's funny is, my wife said the same exact thing even before we heard Ali Dawa. She's like, dude. After we finished the podcast, she's like, man, this guy it was just an emotional rage, just an emotional storm, very little logic.
I would not be surprised in the slightest if he's transitioning to being a woman.
The thing is, his whole big thrust, his whole thing is, I'm an apostate, will you kill me? They admitted it, and it's done. That's it. His argument died.
Yeah, it died. He's like, see, they're going to kill me. And it's like...
funny thing is when they were talking about names, another ridiculous thing, like, oh, they're forcing me to keep like Abu Bakr and stuff. And I love when PBD asks him, so what do you say? He's like, that's mute, the conversation mute. I was advocating to like, put him to death. So like, why are we discussing this?
Yeah.
This is a minor detail.
But even then, Patrick says like, I was born in a Muslim country. I mean,
no, actually, no. What I found very interesting is, for the most part, Daniel Hakikuju did not interrupt them when they were speaking. Jake did a little bit more, but Daniel Hakikuju did not. He let them speak their mind. And I thought the one time he's going to interrupt him is when he's giving a personal story. Basically, this brother Rashid guy was basically saying, oh, they didn't even let us change our names and stuff. He's like, literally, as he said that, they didn't even they forced us to keep, Muslim names for our children, like Abu Bakr. He's like, that's false. And then he's like, and I'm like, wow, of all the times he's going to interrupt is his personal story. He's like, look, Patrick's right here.
Yeah.
He was born in Iran. And his name is Patrick. And Patrick goes, yeah. And then Patrick eventually goes, yeah, that's interesting. My name is Patrick and my sister's Paulette. And he just shrugged. He literally shrugged his shoulders and just, moved on.
So you know what happened afterwards, right? The tweet storm?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Robert Spencer basically like tweets out, hey, take my word for it.
No, he'll read it.
Gonna
I think we should read it. Saad, read it.
I'll pull it up. It was great.
And then PBD responds as well.
So here it is. Robert Spencer. Quote, watch for Patrick Bet David to convert to Islam soon. When the Islamic apologist on his show defended murdering people for exercising their freedom of conscience, he should have understood what he was dealing with. Instead, he babbled on about building bridges and went on the Dean show with hate-filled lying character assassin Eddie right after. PBD is infatuated with Islam. That is understandable, given the wholesale moral collapse in the West and the fact that the deep and widespread corruption is spread into their churches. But he should have realized that one enslavement to tyranny and lies is no cure for another. He is getting played expertly by the Dawa boys and has no idea what is being done to him.
Dawa boys.
Yeah, the Dawa boys. Right. And then Patrick Bet David responds, you sound bitter, upset, and frustrated. You were given an opportunity to come discuss the differences between Islam and Christianity. They seemed prepared with pointed questions to ask you while you seemed defensive. Being upset with your performance is understandable.
Yeah, that is such... the funny thing is, Robert Spencer saying that tweet clearly admits defeat, right?
Sore loser, right?
He admitted defeat. He admitted defeat, right? And I love that PBD responded that way. Like, and the amazing thing is, Christians, I think Tristan Tate always responded directly to Robert Spencer, and Benjamin Owen responded directly to him, and they were all saying you were defeated. Benjamin Owen's completely against these kind of people, anyways, because Benjamin Owen actually respects Islamic jurisprudence. He respects it, and he thinks countries that have it fare better. But even Tristan Tate said something like, this is a disappointing showing, essentially.
And if you read a lot of these comments, there's people who say that, the fact that Islam sticks to its law is what's attractive about it. Because what has the liberal paradigm of evolving the creed to a point where it's no longer recognizable got us to? It's got us to transgender people, essentially, and like all kinds of random ideas that are going around. it's not helped anybody.
That's the difference between subjective and objective morality. The fact is, objective morality comes from God, right? And so we can say that murder is wrong. Murder will always be wrong. It has been wrong. It will continue to be wrong. And we can claim this about everything God has given us, right? So if we can't eat pork. Pork was never okay to eat, continues to not be okay to eat, right? And we can say this for many things. And I think Hakiki brought this up Jake brought it up. Do you think it is inherently, but I think
inherently wrong, inherently immoral,
inherently immoral, and he eventually said yes. And see, that's the problem.
Inherently immoral
to kill children, to kill babies.
No, it was not.
It was
blasphemy, apostasy.
Apostasy.
Yeah, a capital punishment for apostasy. And the funny thing is, we stick to our morals, and these guys stick to liberal morals, which their own Bible refutes. And then they have a problem with that. They have this cognitive dissonance that they face.
That goes back to my initial point where the purpose of PBD's entire arrangement was to build bridges between Muslims, conservative Muslims and conservative Christians, to make them allies against this liberal propaganda machine. But the guests he invited were more like liberal so-called Christians, secular Christians who were advocating more for liberal values.
They weren't there to defend Christianity.
As they always are, they were just illogically, they stopped at transgenderism. 5-10 years ago, they were illogically stopped at homosexuals, right? I mean, there's no defining line, right?
They were straight up Islamophobes. That's their career Islamophobes. Look at the number of books that guy wrote.
I don't understand, how could somebody write 20 books on Islam, right? Islamophobia, essentially. How much more is there to write?
Yeah,
the guy will continue writing books because it prints money and the government supports him.
I don't think it prints money. I think someone's paying him to do it.
No, of course. It prints money because I don't think people are buying it as much. But it's not like a New York Times bestseller. Yeah. But the government or somebody's financing these books.
Maybe the government that prints money is.
He could be wealthy enough now. I mean, clearly some of his books have actually taken off. And he's been on, I'm sure, the New York Times bestseller list.
When you're collaborating with the CIA and FBI, I'm sure you get a lot of money, right?
Yeah, of course.
But going back, ideally, you should have had more conservatively minded Christians to come and have this conversation.
I think a lot of people were advocating for William Lane Craig, which that would have been amazing.
I saw some people in the tweets commenting, "Why not David Wood, who's a theologian?"
No.
Again, but the problem.
Robert Spencer works with David Wood. They're both on the same boat. Like, there's no difference. And it's so funny to me. Robert Spencer, I'm not saying he's a decent guy, but at least he's well dressed. He looks like a professional, quotes. But he's partnered with David Wood, who like, you've seen certain podcasts. He's dressed and like trans.
Didn't he try to eat Peter the
Yeah, this is absolute joke. And somebody who's like posing as an academic, as a scholar, and he's partnering with David Wood. He's ruining his own credibility. But I want to talk about, like, probably like move on with this. But it's interesting that these two people who came on as Christian side, they clearly did not understand the podcast they were on, who their audience is. These people are like PBD, ultra masculine conservative man. The biggest thing about PBD was he interviewed Andrew Tate twice. He interviewed Tristan Tate. The audience is clearly pro-masculine. They don't want to see somebody like Rashid cry. Okay? And then not only that, it's so funny when I think Jake brings up, like, what about Andrew Tate? He converted. And he said, you can keep him.
Keep him.
Like, ridiculous. Do you know the audience you're talking to? You just rejected the man that everybody's following right now.
By the way, this entire topic, if you go back and listen to PBD's podcast from 1 to 2 years ago, he started getting very interested with this topic probably after Andrew Tate blew up, and he had that first podcast with Andrew Tate, and Andrew Tate talked about why Islam is intolerant or more intolerant, that's what he said, and why that's beneficial to maintain and preserve Islamic values compared to what Christians are doing. And this is where I think PBD got more and more involved with this, this debate. And he started talking to other people, even in its other more politically oriented podcasts with our guests. He started, bringing this topic up and, getting their views on it. And then eventually it ended up with this podcast that we just discussed.
That makes sense, because when he was interviewing Andrew Tate is one who brought it. Now, maybe PBD had brought this up previously, possibly, but Tate brought up very, very clearly, explicitly, the problem with tolerance. that the Christian world of today is too tolerant. They're tolerant of everything to the point where what's left? If you're going to tolerate everything, then what do you have left?
That was his famous quote, and I think traditional Christianity is adopting the stance of no tolerance
or less tolerance, at the very least. And I think PBD said that. PBD, he had this whole little story he gave in the middle where he's like, I have these 5 traits, the third of which is tolerance, and I'm starting to have a problem with the third one, tolerance. Yes. And I think we've swung. I think tolerance is good in any religion. Right? There has to be a certain amount of tolerance to, to survive, right? But too much tolerance is bad. Too much intolerance also bad, right? If you're intolerant of everything, then you can't have a society. Or too tolerant, you can't have a society. There's a middle ground we have to tread.
There was one thing that Robert Spencer did mention. What is Robert Spencer? Or it's probably Robert Spencer. Yeah. That he did say, he was talking about, Daniel was saying, well, Muslims are more intolerant, right? And it was about the apostates thing that we would kill them. And then he was saying, hey, if you want us to be intolerant, we would kill all the Christians that convert to Islam as well, right? Yeah. So there is a kind of thing where, if you think about it, what's beneficial to us as Muslims? Do we really want super duper intolerant Christians?
No, I don't. I think the idea of intolerance is like, don't be tolerant of everything, right? Like the idea is have some structures, have some opinion, have something strong of value that you hold that cannot change, right? The problem is what they have nothing. Everything can change, right? Everything's subject to reform. Even I think the Pope recently, I forgot what he was talking about, but the Pope mentioned, I think he was talking about I don't know if it was gay rights or something else. But he said, "Oh, it's not a big deal for us because in the past we've changed stuff too." He was talking about interest, right? In the past, we used to be against interest, then we started taking interest. And we've evolved, we've changed, we have, changed our laws, and it's not a big deal for if we do something like that again. And it was actually pretty interesting. The Pope would say that.
I think Eddie summarized it pretty well in the small Dean Show interview he did afterwards, where he basically said, you can't bring divorce lawyers to a marriage. And that's what happened here.
That was a beautiful quote.
Yeah. If you're trying to build bridges between Muslims and Christians, you can't bring anyone on either side, for that matter, who is, so strongly opposed to an Islamophobic extent, to an extreme extent, I would say. Because it was very clear that Robert Spencer actually had written an article to investigate Haqiqi. Yeah, exactly. So you can't have that. And I think
4 of them.
To summarize that, it was basically that. And I think the tweets afterwards showed very clearly where obviously Brother Rashid obviously did not do well in that debate. And even Robert Spencer, despite his attempts to explain Christianity, at the end, it clearly showed, even from his own point, his own words, really, that he failed. And so I think, yeah, it's very, very interesting.
Well, what I find interesting at PBD is that his recognition for who is a good Muslim. So many other podcasts, they bring Jordan Peterson. We give a lot of credit to his intelligence stuff. The initial Muslims he was bringing on, they were not, traditional or good conservative Muslims, right? And it's amazing. The people who he has brought on have been good conservative Muslims. Habib, he was bringing on initially Muhammad Hijab, Ali Dawa. They recommended these two, and, he brought them on. And also interesting is, I forgot who he interviewed before, but I think Jake or somebody was talking about it, or maybe it was, I just heard somebody talking about mentioning that, you had a previous guest on who was Muslim. And it's amazing that you yourself, PBD, you pointed out that, hey, you're making secular arguments.
It was Reza Aslan.
Reza, yes. Yeah, Reza Ahmed, right?
Reza Aslan.
Reza Aslan, okay. Reza Aslan.
Yeah, I met him. He actually speaks well. I think debates well in certain regards, but he comes from a very, very liberal point of view, such that his Islam is compromised in a sense where he was debating just like Brother Rashid and Robert were.
Yeah, but an amazing thing is PBD caught that, and he pointed out, hey, you seem to be arguing more secular values and liberal values than Islamic values, which again, inshallah, I wish the best for PBD, and inshallah he becomes Muslim. But even if he does, I think he's a good, strong Christian ally at this point, it seems.
Yeah, but the problem is now Robert Spencer with that tweet, he was his last straw. Like, he wanted to just make sure if PBD ever thinks of becoming Muslim, he'll think back at this tweet and be like, well, Robert Spencer was right. It might push him back. But if he does become Muslim, that's,
he's kind of in a Tristan Tate position at this point.
He's in Tristan Tate position, yeah.
Tristan Tater. For what it's worth, I don't think Tristan Tate, just personality. If Tristan Tate, of course, we've heard less from him than we have from his brother Andrew, but if he's anything like his brother, and it clearly seems they're both intertwined, they're both the same, then he will accept this. As he said before, it's not a matter of being convinced per se.
Give it time.
For him, it's like, if it's right, he'll feel it. And he's not opposed to it. That much is clear.
No, he's not.
He's not opposed to it. He's like, I'm Christian now. I was atheist before. And if Islam just works in every sense, just fills my being, there's no other way, then I'll be Muslim before I know it. And so, anyway, moving on, that's a great time to talk about our next topic. Andrew Tate's Islam, actually. And so I'll kind of start this off with, I think it's very interesting. So he accepted Islam, a little background here. He accepted Islam, I think, around August or September of last year, of 2022. And then he was put in prison, I think in December, right before New Year's. And so, he wasn't Muslim for very long before he was jailed and essentially house arrest afterwards. But, all these podcasts, especially after him getting out of jail, many points of view he has, many things he says about Islam are things he said even before he became Muslim, in a sense where I think he was just someone who was close to his fitrah, right? Yeah. I think he's someone who just through sheer logic and his innate fitrah arrived at the right conclusions, Islamic conclusions, I would say, but still, especially in regards to, I think, relationships when it comes to marriage and how that dynamic works. It is very clear his lack of, and theology itself, where I think in monotheism he's a little unclear, because when the words he uses, I don't think he's necessarily, plural or, thinks that every path, he thinks there's multiple paths to God. He uses that word all the time as if Christianity is a path to God, where I think Islam would obviously disagree.
No, but it is kind of a path to God, right? Because it does bring you closer to God than an atheist paradigm would necessarily.
And,
right?
I think he comes from the atheist
You get
background.
acquainted with the concept of God. And if you're trying to be a God-fearing Christian, you will try to read the Bible and try to understand it.
I agree, but first, no, I agree with that. No, 100%. I think a Christian is closer to the truth than an atheist is, 100%, right? However, it's not. Islam is not.
It's not salvational. It's not salvation.
It's not salvation.
Yes.
Exactly. Basically, not everyone goes to heaven. So you could be a good Christian and it could be. Let's make one thing very clear. You could technically be a righteous Christian person, and if you never got the true message of Islam, you may end up in heaven. Well, let me caveat that. However, that's not. I don't think he means that. I think he truly believes that if he just sees a random Christian, maybe his brother, if he never converts, for example, who may end up in heaven just like him, he got there through Islam, he'll get there through Christianity.
Interesting point. I remember a while back, the whole dawah about 10, 15 years ago used to be like, oh, you know what, you atheists, you're so close to Christianity. I think this is like a Didat or somebody thing. Where like, you guys are so close to Islam because you say La ilaha. All we have to say is afterwards, illallah.
That can
right?
Yeah,
but the thing is, funny thing is, I think it's opposite now. I think if you're an atheist, I think you're further away from Islam than you're actually a Christian, because Christians' faith has already declined so much, and they're kind of the Christians that you see, or who are Christians, who are still in this world, abiding by their faith or believing Christianity. They're like on a losing battle, right? And they want to conserve that faith. And I think if you talk to them and convince them that there's issues with your faith, I have a feeling nowadays, this might be anecdotal based on like the Dawah videos I've seen, they have a better chance of accepting Islam than a pure atheist.
I think that's always been the case. I think those comments that you're talking about are meant more as a joke than the reality.
Maybe. I just remember hearing that a lot during the Dawah about 10, 15 years ago, where the atheists, they would always bring up to them that, hey, you guys are so close to accepting us. Like, I think that the idea was, because at some point, Didat and Zakir Naik, they were mainly anti-Christian polemics, right? Their whole thing, they were not talking about atheists as much as Christianity, right? That was the big battle. The idea was early on in America, immigrant comes over, the chances of them accepting Christianity was a lot higher than them becoming atheist. That was the actual battle back then. Now it's like they'll most likely go atheist.
It's like your dad. He knows the Bible really well. Like he can talk really well to a Christian, give them dawah, but maybe not as much to a purely an atheist.
I think there's different types of atheists too, right? There's the atheists like Richard Dawkins and those people who are the really scientific, or what's his name, Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? People like that who are staunch atheists.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Yeah, exactly. Who are staunch atheists who truly believe in atheism. They truly believe there's no God, or at the very least they may be agnostic, right? Versus the atheist from school. The guy, who's 18, 19, 20 years old, who's never really given it any significant thought, but just goes along the same lines of, well, I see suffering. I can't imagine a God who allows suffering, so I don't know if God exists. And they just move on. Right? That's it. Yeah. They haven't given a deep thought. Now, someone who's deeply thought about God and arrived at atheism is, I think, way further gone than someone who's like, I'm atheist because I don't know.
Also,
right?
I think the kind of like the Andrew Tate timeline does exist because there are a lot of people who are Christians. They end up being kind of disenchanted by Christianity, right? Or, okay, fine, this is not, this whole thing about three gods and whatnot. It's not really making much sense to me. And then they, okay, fine, this can't be true, so I'll become an atheist for now. And then I think I think it depends on your intention and your resolve, right?
Why you became atheist?
Yeah, I think that does matter. Some people can be, outright like deny it, like out of arrogance that,
Or through desires and stuff,
Exactly.
they abandon atheism, Christianity.
But for some, it could be more natural that, hey, this is not making sense to me, so maybe this is, wrong.
Something's wrong with it.
I think
something's wrong with
Jake said that from the podcast where he's basically like just the monotheism of Christianity never clicked. And once I learned about the monotheism in Islam, it clicked. And I think that is the case for many people, where just the Trinity, I mean, so how many pastors and priests and people have you seen who just struggle to explain the Trinity, well, or as soon as you bring it up, you're like, oh, that's complicated.
Which is crazy to me because that's a basic. I think the concepts of Christianity, they are like the basic concepts, right? The core Christianity is the Trinity and how they attain salvation. And both those concepts have such serious issues.
Yeah.
At a base level, like the whole salvation thing, before they used to sacrifice animals. What happened to people who before Jesus? Why did God mislead those people and give them all these rules and sacrifices and this is what you have to do? You have to do the law. And then afterwards, they completely changed how salvation works. And while Jesus was the God of the Old Testament and now the New Testament, and then, again, going back to the Trinity, they don't even know who God is until the 4th century.
They cannot even explain the core belief of their faith, right? I mean, it's how are you going to convince people to... Anybody who reads into it or tries to think about it too much would just end up getting confused.
And Islam has a core in the Quran.
The Tawheed is so clear. God is one. Nothing before him, nothing after him. He does not beget, nor is he begotten. He is Ahad. He is one, the only. Period. That's it.
They've complicated the Trinity beyond belief.
But that...
Did you get that? You got that?
Nice.
Nice pun. Very punny.
Yeah.
But
So,
my dad, by the way, may Allah have mercy on him, he was telling me the story of this Hindu friend he had. And one of these days in his drawing room, he kind of told him about Islam. And we believe in one God. And many years later, he saw him at Hajj randomly. And he's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, oh, ever since I was in your drawing room, that journey kind of started. And now I'm Muslim. And to be honest with you, that idea of just one God is such an irresistible concept. It appeals to everyone's internal fitrah. It just does. And when you're a Christian and you believe in God, and you believe in one God, supposedly, like monotheism, when you encounter the pure monotheism of Islam, there's one God, worthy of worship, no partners, that's it.
Yeah.
He begets not, nor is he begotten. It just makes sense. And when you're living as a Christian right now, where your theology is question mark, even your church isn't following its own Bible very, very well, and people are calling it a fable, and then you see Islam and Muslims sticking to their beliefs, sticking to the Quran, sticking to their earliest sources, and they also look really strong.
I think some of the main I think explaining that their concept of Trinity is not a true monotheism keeps them away from Christianity, makes their faith decrease. While monotheism might make sense to them, but it doesn't increase their faith in Islam. You know what I find interesting about Christians? I think their biggest hiccup with Islam is the idea of salvation. Their idea of salvation is God is so perfect, so just. If you commit a single sin, there is no way he will let you enter into paradise or forgive you. He must take compensation or something. It must be a sacrifice. Something has to be given for you to, be with him again. Go to Jannah, right? Go to heaven. And it's such a strong concept. I remember even at university, Christians will always come to me and ask me on salvation. They said it's impossible. How could you say that you can do, how could you say you can go to the heaven with your works? And it would be amazing. I would explain to them that even in Islam, we don't go through heaven with our works. Like even for a single eye, we can't. It doesn't matter how much we do for the benefit of the eye that we have. We can never pay back Allah, right? In that sense, we will go through Allah's mercy, and I think that's a key concept. They always say Christianity is a religion of peace and mercy. how is there mercy if you come to the judge, you commit a crime, and if somebody says, oh, the judge was merciful with me today, what do you think would happen at that courtroom? The judge dismisses the case, right? He hears the case and he dismisses it. That's mercy. This is not mercy when the judge says, okay, I will take the punishment. I'll give the punishment to somebody else. You will never call that judge merciful.
Or just.
I mean, their concept of justice is kind of weird. I've heard some Christian pastors talk about it, that their concept of justice is, but you will definitely not describe it as mercy. He is taking payment for your sin, regardless. It could be from you or from somebody else.
Actually, I gotta say, as a kid growing up, the concept, you see evil as a kid too. By the time I was 8, 9 years old, I knew very clearly there are evil people in the world, historical evil, let alone the evil you see in front of you. There's bad kids, good kids, right? And for me, the day of judgment, especially when I learn about Firaun, I'm talking about Sunday school, learning about the story of Moses and Firaun. You're like, here's someone, Firaun. He grows up in the palace as a young child. He born a king, he dies a king, right? Never suffers the same hardships the average, pauper, I guess, in the street, the slave does. How is that just? How can Hitler kill 6 million people, blow his own brains out, and then just believe in Jesus and get up? You know what I'm saying? So, to me, the concept of the day of judgment, the fact that everyone, no matter how big or small the deed, is held to account for that deed, it's so powerful. So powerful, where you feel like no matter what happens to you in this life, Allah will make it fair. There will be a judge in the hereafter, the ultimate judge, the perfect judge, Allah. He knows everything about the person who wronged you. He knows everything about you. He knows their intent, your intent. And then he will give a fair judgment, right? We always wonder, like, what is the price for a life in this world? If you accidentally commit manslaughter, what do you do? This and that. Allah knows exactly how much every life is worth, how much every penalty is worth. I mean, it'll be the perfect judgment. And I love that about Islam, where everything will be made fair. If you were wronged, you will get your retribution.
Can you explain this one thing to me? So, in the Christian belief, Jesus died for your sins, right? So long as you believe in Jesus and the person of Jesus, no matter what you do, your sins are forgiven, right? I mean, you're going to join him in the kingdom of heaven so long as you believe in him, regardless of what sins you do. Is this correct or no?
By the way, just a disclaimer that Christians, I mean, you can't put all Christians and all Christians. I mean, the Christian beliefs are so different. They're all over the place, right? So some do believe that, some believe something completely different.
For the most part, my understanding is even in the Catholic, in Catholicism, you can confess your sins.
You have to confess your sins.
I don't know the specifics, but I know the general belief is, again, most of my Christian knowledge comes from either reading myself, my fellow friends when I debate them, or Zakir Naik and Ahmadidat debates.
But the baseline is your actions will not take you to heaven. Your actions are probably the least relevant thing in the factor of you going to heaven.
Right.
No, but do your actions take you to hell? If you believe in Jesus.
No,
disbelief in Jesus takes you to hell.
Well, so that's my point. So that's my point. So why does it matter to them? Why did Robert Spencer and these guys start drawing the line on transgender and gay people?
What's such a
because if they're saying that the person, the human being is elevated and is respected, and essentially as long as you believe in Jesus you're fine. So if I'm, let's say I decide, hey, I'm gay, but I believe in Jesus. Stop, Phil. Never.
We do believe in Jesus. What do you mean?
But but I believe in Jesus.
prophet.
Who cares? I mess up, I sin, but because I believe in Jesus and He died for my sins already, I'm good. I'm gonna.
I mean,
why would you stop me? But I'm assuming that's the reasoning that other churches use once they face tons of political pressure from the alphabet soup group. That what, you're right. Jesus died for your sins. You're a man who's now a woman. It's okay. You'll be fine.
Yeah, ultimately that's what happens, right? At the end of the day, every single law will be pushed aside. What was it? They somebody said, they threw the bathwater out, the baby with the bathwater out, right? They just essentially threw everything out. They have nothing left of the religion.
I think there's a limit of our knowledge here, but to my knowledge, most people have told me, at least the debates I've heard, the people who debated with Zakir Naik, that's what they claimed. But I think, out of our
maybe one day we'll have a Christian brother.
One thing that I want to say is, the only reason why you should even go into arguing about specific details about Christian belief is if you're talking to a devout Christian who believes in those details.
Good point.
The more important discussion and argument is the authenticity of modern Christianity in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Just the fact that we believe that it hasn't been preserved, it's completely inauthentic and made up, and didn't clearly come from God directly, it's not even worth talking about those or arguing about those beliefs. Unless, of course, you're talking to a really devout Christian who has been devout since.
But this is, I do this all the time, where I find it difficult to make the argument because they said no, God preserved it in whatever fashion. I mean, we can go into details, but I don't know enough history. Maybe I could find out about it. But what I end up doing, to me, and this is what I say a lot of the time, is let's go back to Tawheed for a brief. I always say this: hey, fine, let's just take your concept of God versus my concept of God, right? Because the first thing I say is the first thing anyone should do out there, right, is decide whether there is a God or not. And I think the natural conclusion, there must be a God. And the next thing you do is you don't make up your own religion, make up your own God. Rather, you go and look at what's out there. So now you look at Judaism, go look at Christianity, go look at Islam.
The sources, if you look at the book, right, you can just compare them side by side and come to a very clear conclusion.
Exactly. I'm saying just Tawheed. I'm saying, look, if you look at your Trinity and the God of Islam, the true monotheism we talked about, it's very clear which one's more appealing to me. And I just say, hey, we'll start there, and we can go,
It's not appealing, it's rational to you. Yeah. The thing is that it's just two different things, right? A Christian come to you with genuine, wants to understand the Christianity or where's Islam, or, what Islam is about. But then there's other people come with pointed questions like, why does Islam do this? Why does Islam? It's always moral-based questions, right? Islam's morality is wrong, why are you this way, right? And to those people, I found it interesting. I like the way Jake approached it, where you could check them. You say, do you think inherently wrong is to kill apostates, right? And then when you quote the Bible at them, and then you say that you are essentially following secularism instead of your own religion, and the reason you frame it that way is like, hey, I want to understand who I'm talking to. Am I talking to somebody who believes in their book, or is following their book, or are they just Christians and following, liberalism? And it's a nice way. And this is not just for Christians, by the way. This is for Muslims as well. Muslims also, all of us, I would say, every single one of us on this table has been affected by liberalism. Liberalism is not just a U.S. phenomenon. It affects people in Pakistan, Indonesia, everywhere in the world. And we also have to constantly check our own biases because we are raised with liberal thought.
Of course, yeah. But look, going back to the whole Bible versus Quran thing, I mean, nowadays you have like fake news, right? And you have fact checkers everywhere. If you put the Quran and the Bible both through a fact checker, I mean, it would be pretty clear. I'm just talking about hypothetically, right? Yeah. I mean, of course, not like a more actual fact checker, but basically, I mean, when you want to learn about something or get news about something or details about something, you always try to go to the most authentic source, right? So first you have to vet your source. Okay, if I want to learn about religion, learn about monotheism, right? What's the most authentic source I can find? And if you go through that process, there's no way you'll end up with the Bible, right? It's been modified so many times, so many changes. The Quran is the only natural result that you'll end up at, right? And then that's kind of the basis of your belief.
Talking about fake news and stuff and fact checking, I always find it funny. PBD always says what, I'm a numbers man, because he was an insurance guy or something. Why doesn't PBD look at the numbers? I guarantee the Inquisition killed more Muslims than has ever any official killing of apostates in the Ottoman Empire or something like that. Because I remember a lot of people discuss this. I think Hakikaju in some of his debates, and this time he didn't mention it. I think it was a good idea, but they have mentioned many times that the actual killing of an apostate was extremely rare. It's like there's very few instances where this actually occurred, and the reason this doesn't occur that much is it only occurred, or typically only occurred, if it was again like a social issue, something it was actually affecting the government, right? It was not just some random person, leaving Islam. It was a movement, or, he was proclaiming it out in the streets and trying to change the status quo, right? Somebody quietly, or even personally within their own bubble, they can even talk about it. They just changed to Christianity and moved on with their life. It didn't happen, right? There was no killing for apostates. And if he's such a numbers guy, if he looks at Islamic history, which is huge, and many, many Christians used to live within the Islamic state, and then you look at Christian states and see the numbers there, and the Inquisition would just completely destroy any numbers that we have in our side.
All right.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
Gotta go back home to our families.
Yeah, gotta go back home to families. So, All right, so that's the end of the first podcast, and
Alhamdulillah,
hopefully, inshallah, we can do this something hopefully weekly.
We'll first vet this by our wives, of course, and they'll give us the live commentary and how good it was, of course.
Yeah, and hopefully the quality is fine. It's first time.
Alhamdulillah, I enjoyed this. I think it was
That's
good.
fun enough.
Yeah, I think we should just limit our conversation.
I haven't had this polite of a conversation with you guys ever.
Exactly.
It's funny when the mic turned on, everybody becomes super polite.
Civil.
I think
Civil
eventually
conversations.
our personalities will come out more and more as this goes on.
Yeah, we're not used to this talking. I'm a little formal right now too, but I think we'll figure it
But
out.
I think we had a good discussion.
Yeah, I think you should just suddenly turn the mic on. We're just chilling. And that's it. You recorded a pod?
Candid podcast.
Yeah, we could just have it recorded from the beginning and then just take a segment of it and put it up.
All right, everybody.
All right.
Anyway,
All right.
all right.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Assalamu alaikum.
See you guys. Assalamu alaikum.